All right, welcome back. We're about to tackle a topic that has fueled countless books, movies, and debates, the rapture. But what if I told you the common story about where this idea came from might not be the whole story? What if its roots go way, way deeper than most people think?
You've probably heard this claim, right? That the entire idea of the rapture was just cooked up, basically out of thin air, back in the 1830s. Well, today we're putting that claim under the microscope. We're going to dig into the historical sources and see if that story actually holds up.
So here's the story you usually hear. The specific idea of a pre-tribulation rapture, the belief that Christians get taken out of the world before this final, terrible period of suffering, that this was a totally new concept, first taught by a minister named John Nelson Darby around 1830.
Okay, so let's dig into this whole 1830s invention idea. But before we even start looking at history, we have to get on the same page about the word itself. I mean, where in the world did we even get the word rapture?
This is super important to understand. You can search your English Bible all day long, but you won't find the word rapture. And that's not some conspiracy, it's because the word itself went on a pretty amazing journey to get to us. So it all starts with the original Greek word in the New Testament, harpazo. It means something like to snatch away or to seize forcefully. Then, when the Bible was translated into Latin, that word became rapiemur, which means we shall be caught up. And from that Latin word, rapiemur, we eventually get our English word, rapture.
Okay, so we've got the word down, but what about the idea behind the word? Can we find this concept of a sudden removal of believers before a great tribulation in the writings of the early church? Centuries and centuries before the 1830s? Let's find out.
Our first stop on this historical scavenger hunt takes us all the way back to the 2nd century. We're looking at a text that was incredibly popular in the early church called the Shepherd of Hermas.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. This text draws a direct line between a person's faith and their ability to escape a coming great tribulation. It's not just some fuzzy hope. It's presenting a real possibility of avoiding this future chaos. That's a huge piece of the puzzle, and it's right here in the 2nd century. Okay, now we're getting to a really heavy hitter, Irenaeus of Lyons. And you got to understand who this guy was. Irenaeus was a student of a man named Polycarp, and Polycarp was a direct disciple of the Apostle John himself. So we're only one generation removed from the original apostles here. This is a big deal.
A scholar named Michael Sfigel points out that the Latin word Irenaeus uses here is asymptheter, meaning taken up, and Irenaeus isn't talking about a metaphor. He's describing a literal event where the church is suddenly taken, and notice the timing. It happens right before that tribulation that Jesus himself talked about.
So let's just pause and recap what we've got from Irenaeus, because it's pretty clear. You have a sudden catching up. It happens before a period of intense tribulation, and it's seen as a reward for faithful believers. Those are the core ingredients, and they're all right here in the 2nd century.
But the trail doesn't go cold there, not by a long shot. Let's keep following this idea as it winds its way through the centuries.
Let's jump forward a couple hundred years to a sermon that scholars attribute to someone they call Pseudo-Ephraim. And what we find here is, frankly, stunningly clear. I mean, wow, it really doesn't get much more direct than that, does it? The saints are gathered prior to the tribulation. And it even says why, so they won't have to see the chaos that's about to hit the world.
Okay, let's take a giant leap forward now, all the way into the 1300s. We find this guy named Brother Dolcino and his followers, the Apostolic Brethren. And guess what? They had a very similar expectation.
You see the pattern here, right? It's the same core idea. Preservation from the persecution of the Antichrist, not through it. And how? By being physically transferred somewhere else, in this case, paradise, to be kept safe.
Okay, we're getting warmer now. It's 1744. We are decades before John Nelson Darby even enters the picture. And we have a Baptist minister named Morgan Edwards, who actually founded the university that became Brown University, and he's writing about a very distinct catching away of the saints.
And this is just incredible, because Edwards lays out a pretty specific timeline. He talks about believers being changed and literally disappearing from the earth when Christ appears in the air, and this happens a full 3.5 years before the start of the millennial kingdom.
So when you take a step back and look at all these pieces we've uncovered, a very different picture starts to take shape, one that really challenges that whole 1830s invention story. Just look at this path through history. We've got footprints of this idea in the 2nd century with Hermas and Irenaeus. We see it again in the 4th century with Pseudo-Ephraim. It pops up again in the 14th century, then again in the 18th century with Morgan Edwards. All of this before we even get to J. N. Darby in the 1830s.
So, let's just put them side by side. On one hand, you have the popular slogan, "No one taught this before Darby." And on the other hand, you have the actual, documented, historical record. As you can see, they just don't line up. The slogan is flatly contradicted by multiple sources spanning centuries.
Now look, let's be super clear. John Nelson Darby was a huge deal. He absolutely played a massive role in organizing this teaching, systematizing it, and popularizing it into the doctrine many people know today. But the idea that he invented it from scratch, the evidence just doesn't support that. It's less like he planted a brand new tree and more like he built a greenhouse for one that had been growing for a very, very long time.
So after this whole journey through history, what are you supposed to take away from this explainer? Where does this leave us? And that really brings us to the big question, doesn't it? If the core ingredients of this teaching are truly ancient, does that change how we should look at the final recipe? The historical record strongly suggests this blessed hope isn't some modern fad. It's an expectation with a long, fascinating, and complicated history in the church, with footprints that are clearly visible across the centuries, just waiting for us to find them.